we've joked for generations now that eventually everyone in America is going to need to learn Chinese because of all the debt China has over us. Um, like in my hometown, a lot of home sales have been going to Chinese foreign people. Point blank, it is not Americans selling their homes to other Americans. It is now foreign money coming in to America at a much greater rate than ever has been seen before. Uh, I want to get a sense from you as to why, or maybe it's just an irrational thought that we've had for so long, but why would China want to see the dollar diminish on the global scale when they hold so much debt and have so many assets tied up here in America for now?
So it's you think China makes these long-term plans. So they have a 2025 plan, a 2035 plan, a 2049 plan. The 2049 plan is the most important one. That's like 100 years, since the CCP's founding, and all these are state-directed national strategic objectives that they sort of all try to link together, right? And one of them is like the Great Rejuvenation. They want to see China basically become a global peer power equivalent to the United States. They want to have like the respect as being like a great nation that they think is, what was lost basically after the ravages of the Opium Wars and the exploitations that sort of befell the Chinese people, in the decades since. And so they see this as like a historical, it's not just a pure economic thing. Like they see it as like a piece of their civilization, or like a status for the civilization that they need to regain. And so for them, it's not just like the blocking and tackling, like the monetary pecking order. It's like they need to see themselves and see other people see them as a great nation, a great civilization on par with the United States. And a lot of the leadership's, the CCP's legitimacy is tied up in meeting those objectives, sort of, telling this has been part of the propaganda for years. And so, people, I mean, even though it's not quite rational, somewhat personify the currencies as like the strength of the currency is like the strength of our nation, even though that's kind of an absurd thing. It does give you a certain degree of power in trade dynamics, right? The United States is able to print dollars and get real goods. Every country would want that to a certain extent. That always comes with a trade-off, though, like the Triffin dilemma. If your currency is the reserve currency, you have to basically be willing to like buy the stuff from other people, which means the stuff isn't made in your country; it's made somewhere else. Which means that production is benefiting those other countries. Their labor markets are the ones that benefit at the expense of your labor markets, and so that has been a sort of globalization, has sort of hollowed out our manufacturing base and relocated production overseas. Our elites thought that was a great deal because we were the most powerful military power. We essentially could view those foreign factories as just, America juniors, right? That would sort of take instructions from us and would, would play nice in a global trade system. China's basically saying, no, like we're not going to play nice in that trade system. We're going to weaponize it against you. And so they want on the margin to be able to price commodities in yuan. But they don't right now want, and really are not in a position to like flip the tables in the United States and have the yuan be the reserve currency, because that would force them to reverse their entire basic economic and currency system, which is mercantilist, export driven. If they were the reserve currency, all of that Chinese manufacturing would have to go to their trade partners that they're running this trick with, right? So they want to try to hedge their bets and have this sort of slow transition take place over time. And it really is contingent on them domestically rebalancing their economy. So they need, if you follow this Chinese specialist named Michael Pettis, there's sort of not that many options they have, but like the best one for them to pursue eventually to raise domestic incomes and basically move in more investment away from like the state sector and the property sector into the domestic sector, stimulate more domestic consumption, just like we have huge amounts of domestic consumption. And then gradually, basically, be able to have more of an independently powered economy that doesn't rely on just producing for the rest of the world. But they're not there yet, and so they're in the position where they basically need to kind of grow their own system organically inside of an existing system, because it's not just going to happen in a vacuum. Just like the United States, the dollar didn't just become the dollar in a vacuum. We took it over from the British over a period of like 20 years, and it took a long time. It took world wars for that system to like fully flip, right? And it was like World War I was sort of the first signs of it when London and New York were starting to compete for trade finance. And, London went into a lot of debt in World War One, and so it became somewhat subservient to New York relatively. But they were still, had all the historical weight behind them, especially in Europe and global trade. So they were still kind of the number one. It really was World War II and the collapse of the British Empire and their massive debts, and the United States Marshall Plan and all that stuff, basically to like completely flip and have the dollar take over. So like it takes dramatic global changes like that for like reserve currency to shift. And I think China just like would prefer, everyone would prefer not to have there be like a global war, right? Because usually, even if you come out, say, on top, you could be coming out on top in a much more diminished world. And, everyone likes to be rich. So I think their primary objective is just to do this slow game. That's why they have these decade-long plans. 2025, get to a certain state, indigenize basically their own technology. So they have had a massive program to basically copy-paste Western technology for the past 20 years and build up their own industrial capacity and start to climb the value chain. And they're still behind, but that's their objective, is sort of steadily increase their technological capabilities and their industrial capabilities in AI, in semiconductors, in automobile manufacturing, and high precision manufacturing, et cetera, to the point where they can now essentially become a regional hegemon and dominate essentially a sphere of influence that's, eventually they see it as being a peer to the United States. And so they have essentially the first and the second island chain as like their version of like the Monroe Doctrine. It's like, this is our territory, don't mess with us. We're going to basically divide the Pacific in half, and Eurasia will split with Russia, and we'll have a multipolar world order. That's what they want to achieve by 2035, roughly. So that's why it's a slow game. It's a matter of sort of carving out spheres of influence, creating regional trade relationships where they can denominate commodities in yuan on the margin without upsetting, their mercantilist policy, and insulate themselves from, what is going to be a much more hostile dollar sanctions regime, and how they can navigate that in the process. And that's where it's going to be successful, but that's their plan.
Okay, I've sufficiently introduced enough chaos and depression onto Monday, so I can feed the mic to you.
No, I love this. It's like staring into the sun, and I'm learning so much. Okay. First question, do you prefer Matthew or Matt?
It's a good question. I usually have gone by Matt.
Okay.
But I don't have much of a preference, but yeah, Matt's usually quicker.
Okay. Matt it is. You posted recently as well on talking about, you said the fundamental economy of the internet is surveillance. You can nibble around the edges, but the stakes are very high now. I wonder if the Roe decision will catalyze interest in what Block and Jack are building with Web 5. You need to bring control over one's ID and data. Let's dig into that. Tell us what you meant by that and what's at stake here.
Yeah, it actually is a good segue from the China story too, because if you think about the great competition that's unfolding is also competition for forms of governance in a technological society, right? And China's approach to that is like the 1984 on steroids digital totalitarian surveillance state, right? And there's been some reporting in the New York Times just in the past week or so on just how sophisticated the Chinese technology there is, where they have like Minority Report, right? They can track everyone. They can do algorithmic like alerts if people gather in certain locations, if people say the wrong words. I think you tweeted about it, right?
Yeah,
this is
like terrifying.
This is terrifying, right?
Like, and just for the audience, I just want to iterate a little bit more.
Yeah.
The Chinese system is so precise that the police are able to say, like, this person is a known agitator. So anytime they leave their house and their phone is not with them, or if they board a train to this specific area like Beijing, flag them, send police over there. And honestly, it blew my mind, the level of precision that they were talking about. I retweeted the post, but as I said, it is some deeply dystopian shit.
Yeah, and that's not only what they're building domestically, but they're exporting it as essentially authoritarianism as a service to, dictators around the world, authoritarians around the world who can basically just subscribe to the Chinese governance model, right? Get the 5G Huawei equipment, get the Hikvision video cameras, get these AI software monitoring tools downloaded and installed, and Chinese people training their security forces, and boom, right? You basically can surveil and monitor your entire population, and you don't have to develop that technology. You basically just you pay China for the privilege. And by the way, China gets all that data on your population at the same time. So that is like truly a scary proposition, right? And it's not just affecting people in China as much as it's unfortunate for them, but China has ambitions, and there's like strong demand for this technology around the world. So if you think the United States can be or should be pushing back against that and offering a different model to countries around the world, not just at home, then I think we need to think hard about what sort of digital infrastructure we have and are going to continue to build that's going to offer a different value proposition in terms of values than what the Chinese are building. And I think there's been a lot of discussion post the Roe decision on the implications for digital privacy and legal exposure for women. People talking about deleting information from their period trackers, but that's like the tip of the iceberg in terms of the amount of data that can be used that right now is sort of, or was, entirely benign, but could now expose someone to legal prosecution. And that then would potentially bring a lot of attention on, well, is there a different way to structure the internet that is less premised on collecting all this data, centralizing it in a random ecosystem of exploitative third parties that can be subpoenaed or just give it up to the law enforcement. And that's where I think what Jack and what the block are trying to build, or at least seem to have a roadmap for, with decentralized identity and decentralized data stores, is so intriguing and potentially like attractive. And yeah, that is I think people look at Web 5 and think it probably have like a contaminated mental association because of all the nonsense around Web 3. But there's a CSU Wildcat on Twitter. I forget his actual name, but he came over from the Ion project with Microsoft. I think he's over there at the block now, building kind of the infrastructure there. I'm just really excited to see what comes out of it. Obviously, it's still very, very early. Probably a fair bit of ways away from being a viable alternative infrastructure. Like, if we're going to have a truly like competitive model against China, like we're going to go out totalitarianize China, and this brings in like the CBDC discussion, because I think it's all, for me, sort of a suite of modern digital technologies about how you do governance in the 21st century, when it comes to your money, when it comes to your data, when it comes to basic patterns of commerce. And like the infrastructure we built over the early days of the internet just are easily capturable and centralizable and exploitable in ways that undermine human freedom. And China is showing us like the worst case version of that. And I think we should use that as a way to sort of calibrate against. It's like, okay, how do we build the anti-China model? What would that look like? I think it would look something like what Jack has in mind. And so if I'm like, okay, China model sort of represents the worst of all possible scenarios, Jack may be like on the other end of the spectrum there. I think that's a contrast that right now is sort of on the whiteboard, but I'm really optimistic about.